So there you go. Do we have Kristian ready to rock and roll? Okay, let's get to this. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been this is a conversation that we've had in the books for a while. The minute that I saw what this guy was up to, a Sherwood Park teacher out of Salisbury Composite High School, we reached out. We said, we got to get him on Real Talk. So here's the deal. Before we say hello, Kristian Basaraba teaches what he calls this skaterpreneur, like skateboard, skaterpreneur course. And one of his recent projects was designed to explore colonialism, creativity, and reconciliation with skateboards. That's right, skateboard design. Now, here's the deal. A few people caught wind of this, and a few people started paying attention to this, and ultimately, we have a Governor General's Award winner as we welcome Kristian Basaraba to the program, my man. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome to Real Talk.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Am I pronouncing your name okay, Kristian?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. This is okay. Are these are clearly some of the boards behind you. These are some of the decks behind you. Can you tell us what we're seeing here? Can you introduce us to this art?
Sure. Well, these aren't student ones, but all those were sold at an auction that I had. So we auctioned them off. We'll talk more about that. But the one where it has, I'm pointing to right now, this is a pro model of Joe Buffalo. So Joe Buffalo is a pro skater out of Vancouver. He grew up in Masquatchie, Alberta, and he was part of the project. Came in and was a guest speaker, and we formed this kind of relationship that I'll get into. And then on the other side, JCat. So this is John Cardinal, a Cree artist, local Cree artist, and he was the artist that actually worked with the students. And so this was his kind of contribution to the project that proudly hangs in my home right now.
Absolutely stunning. Have you always been, with regards to, we're going to talk about, you're a real, I'm going to say community organizer. You're a guy that's done a lot to bring people together. You're the founder of a group we'll talk about, Rad Dads Edmonton. And I know you're big in the arts. You're the lead singer in a punk rock cover band. You're a guy that has a lot going on. How did you come up with the idea? Ultimately, like we said, the one that resulted in you earning and being awarded a Governor General's History Award for excellence in teaching. Where did you find that intersection of art, skateboarding, and reconciliation?
Well, there's so many influences, I guess, that I could kind of touch on. But the main influence with the project was from a company out of Saskatchewan called Colonialism Skateboards, and so it was created, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago by an artist and skateboarder educator named Michael Lagnan, and so he. His mandate is to educate through skateboarding. And so with the class that you kind of mentioned, the skaterpreneur class that I created at my high school, do you want me to go into it? I kind of talk about that. So
yeah, we have all the time in the world. Okay. Yeah, I would love to hear it.
So that class, which is a career and technology studies class, that I created was really inspired by the work of a guy named Craig Morrison out of Toronto. And so he has or kind of runs an alternative school called the Oasis Skateboard Factory. And so basically I kind of modeled my class after him. I was able to go there a couple of years ago and spend about a week there with him, kind of learning what he does. And so it's an alternative school design program that students earn high school credits by creating their own skateboard brand and then running their own skateboard business. And so my class is essentially the same as his in the fact that that's what I do with my students. They create a brand. We look at, we kind of preempt it with, looking at what an entrepreneur is, business types, that sort of thing. And then I challenge them to create their own brand name, their brand purpose, a brand logo. And then once we have kind of that established, or the students have that established, I get them to create brand assets or brand assets. So we actually hand make skateboards in the classroom. We get them to do sticker design. And so we work with a local sticker company to do that. They do T-shirts, they do branded grip tape. And so all in that process of creating those brand assets and those things kind of for their business. We look at, obviously we study it and look at different brands, Canadian brands, that sort of thing. And so that's where the colonialism kind of piece comes in. And then I talk about and get them to look at brand collaborations. And so that's kind of where this project came in. So I, looked at Colonialism Skateboards, what they were doing. I wanted to model a project based after what he's doing. And I wanted my students to work with an Indigenous artist in terms of the brand collaboration with JCAT.
I mean, so much of this is just making connections, right? To state the obvious, putting people in touch. I would imagine that your students have gone on their own journeys and individual journeys, therefore probably very meaningful journeys on understanding Canada's history with its Indigenous people and some of the issues that persist and remain, and maybe even to start thinking about some of the solutions. As a teacher invested in the lives of these high school students, what sort of an impact did you note from this project on the young learners?
That's hard. Hard for me to answer because I think it's still ongoing.
Yeah, sure.
It was just. I really believe it's a project that I can continue to do annually and just kind of build on it. It's created so many different relationships, even including me, the relationships that I had. So, with that project, my goal was to engage students with Canada's colonial past. And so we looked at some topics such as residential schools, the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls inquiry. And so those are kind of maybe the two main big topics that students tackled with their skateboard graphics. And so some of the things that we wanted them, or I wanted them to do, is to kind of address this legacy of colonization, the systemic racism that we tend to see amongst or towards Indigenous culture and people. We also incorporated foundational knowledge, explored historical and active documents such as Treaty Indian Act. We looked at the TRC's 94 calls to action, the UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And then one of the big things that I always look at, because part of this project was funded by a grant through the Social Justice Education Grant through the Aspen Foundation. And I've been successful in it in the last kind of 4 or 5 years in my current role in procuring a bunch of grants. And my big thing is, when I look at a grant, what I want my students to do is I want them to work with community members. And so I want them to pay. I want to use that grant to pay people to kind of come in and teach my students, like for this project, for example, I wanted them to work with JCAT. I wanted him to host a number of workshops, kind of lead them with the arts. And then I wanted to bring in Joe Buffalo, to talk about his story. So he's, a pro skater. He's battled addiction and substance abuse his whole life, and truly an inspiration, and found this, this outlet through skateboarding, and he's had experience in a survivor residential school. And so, I kind of lost where I was going with that. It's the idea that, so the students really gravitated towards JCAT. They worked closely with him. They were kind of inspired. He was inspired by the students. So there's that intergenerational relationship there. Joe came in, told his story. Now, I'm part of the NCTCA committee, which is the North Central Teachers Convention Association. And so what we did is Joe is going to actually be a guest speaker at our teachers convention. So it's that connection again, that kind of, that you talked about. So I don't know.
It's all what I'm trying to say is it's the all reconciliation about piece, right?
Is all about the connect. Yeah,
100%.
It's about the community. And so one of the things that I'm really proud of is that we exhibited all of the work at a local skate shop. And so that was kind of the culmination of that project. We said, okay, we have about 17 boards. And so we had an art exhibit set up at Local 124 for about 5 weeks. And, in our opening exhibit, we had a number of people come out. We had a skateboard demonstration because they have a little mini ramp in their shop, and so we had the Full Circle skateboard team. And so Full Circle is also we looked at them as a brand. So it's an Edmonton brand that looks at and tries to raise awareness for mental health issues. And so that was kind of another kind of piece or another connection that I brought into the project.
Kristian, what's really jumping out at me here is the conversations that we've had, but oftentimes, as stupid as this sounds, We have a conversation involving people talking about curriculum and Indigenous history and reconciliation, but we realize that nobody that's participating in the conversation is actually in front of students in a classroom. So what this is doing is restoring my faith to a certain degree, at least at the school that you teach at, that there is some meaningful discussion happening on reconciliation, that there is the inclusion in the curriculum, or at least how you're delivering it, that's pushing students to better understand the history of Canada as we understand it now, Canada before 1867, etc. I mean, are you the outlier here, or do you think that the general public maybe isn't aware of some of the conversations that are happening?
It's a good question. I couldn't speak to the public, but I do feel that we're getting better at having that conversation. We're getting better as educators as bringing these things. There is, it's part of the TQS, the Teacher Quality Standards now. I am a bit worried, actually, and a bit concerned. Here we're on a show that has some political. People are fired up, obviously, and so this is, the UCP curriculum plan, isn't really out yet, but there has been things that suggest that Chris Champion suggests that leaving out residential schools, calling the inclusion of Indigenous culture a fad, and so that's something that's quite concerning as an educator for me, because these are issues that I feel that need to kind of be brought to the forefront. It's also, I think, teachers find it difficult because we're not really sure. I'm not really sure, I wanted to bring in these leaders. I wanted to bring in JCAT to kind of tell his story. I wanted to bring in Joe Buffalo to tell his story. So these are Indigenous leaders that I bring into the community and let them tell their story, because I learn from them. I'm not in no way an expert in Indigenous education. I'm a science teacher that likes skateboards and skateboard art.
Well, you're being drawn to something that you care about, obviously, and I think it's remarkable. I do want to note that 2Beaver, that's the handle that this viewer uses, and as soon as I said this, now I've lost the comment because so many people are chiming in on this, which is awesome. But 2Beaver sort of checked me on something that I just said, and I want to acknowledge this. Said, Ryan, we are not, Canada's Indigenous. We are our own nations. And you might just say those whose lands we stole. That from 2Beaver. I always want this feedback and these comments to be part of this conversation as we pay attention to our language and our understanding, our interpretation of these stories. Kristian, ultimately, so I know you're gonna say, and it's predictable because you care about your students, and you're gonna say this isn't about winning awards, and you're obviously the student's journey is the most important, and that is the truth, obviously, of course. However, you did win a pretty high-profile award that I would imagine means a lot to you, the Governor General's History Award for Excellence in Teaching. I mean, that's the type of thing that doesn't get rolled up into the sock drawer. That's the type of thing that gets framed and hung. What did it mean? What did it say to you when you were recognized with this?
I'm going to say you said I shouldn't say it. It's not really about the award.
Well, I wanted to get ahead of that. So let's cut through that.
Yeah. Definitely an honor for sure. It's to me is like a feather in the hat for all the hard work that I've done, in the last, it's my 20th year of teaching. And, I tend to think I'm a pretty engaging teacher and have worked really hard to kind of get where I am. The last 4 years kind of building this, allowing me to do this kind of the skateboard class, which it's kind of almost like a dream of mine. I get to build skateboards with kids and teach them kind of the basics of branding, that sort of thing. I still teach science and physics and stuff is my jam, but and also to kind of just see, it was just a kind of a different thing. For my most of my career, I've been doing physics and high level physics and chemistry teaching and science teaching, education, and you get satisfaction of that, of course, but I've never really had that experience of what it was like to see students kind of create things from scratch. And that was so rewarding. And that's kind of the piece, especially with this project and some of the boards that came out, they've all been sold and went to auction, but some of them, the images that they have and showing they're learning about, especially about residential schools. There were some of the more meaningful boards to me, and the fact that, these students get it. Here we're talking about, students that are 15, 16, 17, and they're really delving into our dark colonial past, and the skateboard project provided them with a voice. So it's which to me was really inspiring and hopeful for Canada's future.
Can you tell us a little bit about Next Step High School in Sherwood Park? Like it's got a bit of a different name, and for those that aren't familiar with it, I would imagine it sounds to me like it might be a little bit of a different approach. Is it?
Yeah, it's our outreach school. So it's an outreach school for my district, and so I did the project at Salisbury, which is like, would someone say, a traditional high school,
right.
A population of about 1,000. So I teach mainly at the outreach school. And so I'm responsible for all the high school science, do a little bit of art and some projects I've done there. And then I would head over to Sal to do the skateboard class. And so the outreach it's really an outreach, Next Step Story it's an outreach school for students, I guess, that don't fit the traditional high school. There could be many different reasons. We deal with students that are, high level athletes, for example. So figure skaters and dancers, they just can't, their training schedule just doesn't allow them to fit in a traditional school in terms of schedule. We have students that have high levels of anxiety and just don't fit in with large groups. And then, we have students that deal with addiction issues, for example, or just daily struggles of life. And we're just trying to encourage them to get their high school diploma and kind of help them with that. And so, we got these outliers. I like to say, like, kind of the outliers, kind of like skateboarders. It's like I grew up being a skateboarder. It was skateboarding. I still see, although it's really getting popular, it's becoming an Olympic sport and that sort of thing. I still think it's really kind of a counterculture, a rebellious type thing. It's an individualistic kind of sport. If we look at what pro skaters do, there are some that get paid lots of money to do what they do, but generally they don't kind of compete. They do their own thing, and they're super creative, and that's kind of how I approach, I guess, my life and also my teaching career.
How has this is kind of a weird question. I'm going to ask you, like, how has the impact of COVID, or how has this pandemic impacted these students, as compared to, but I mean, how do you know? Because all you know is your students. So, I mean, maybe you can just comment more generally on what you've seen. I mean, I know that, some kids are going to be going back to school. I've seen a lot of parents of elementary age kids going like, oh, thank God they're going back to school on January 11th. And then there are people that have real concerns, taking a look at some of the COVID numbers and going, we're sending them all back to school now. And some people have been keeping their learners at home, and there's been different implications for junior high and high school students. What's it look like from your perspective?
It's a challenge for sure. It's, especially at the outreach school, one of the things that we strive really hard to do is make these really deep, authentic relationships with our students. Not saying that teachers don't do that, but I think it's a bit different in a class of 35 to 40 students, or maybe even 45 students, depending what school you're at. And but we tend to have a smaller population. Students are doing a self-directed learning model, a hybrid type of thing, and so we tend to have more close one-on-one conversations with our students. And so there's not as many of those, or it's a bit more challenging to have those with our students, being kind of afraid to come into the building and see us and stuff. And so, yeah, it's again, going back to a theme that we've been talking about, making connections and relationships. And so it's been a lot more difficult to make those connections and relationships with students because of COVID.
Before I let you go, Kristian, I just checked the clock and I went, oh wow, it's 9:26 already. I feel like you're the type of guy that we'd go and sit down for a beer and then we'd end up having like 9 of them. But I wanted to ask you about Rad Dads Edmonton, which I mean, the name itself is compelling, the branding is compelling, and the minute that I mentioned that you were going to be on this morning, the founder of Rad Dads, you guys have the organization, obviously you do a podcast as well. I had a bunch of buddies reaching out to me, and I'm getting texts on my personal phone of guys that are wearing their Rad Dads t-shirts that are like repping them this morning that are proud to have you here. What's it all about? Who's it for? What's the deal?
Oh man, that's like another hour.
That's
another couple beers. But I guess to my 30-second elevator speech, I actually use Rad Dads as my brand to kind of model for the students and kind of talk about it. So my kind of 30-second spiel or elevator speech for Rad Dads is a group. I guess our main purpose is to promote positive parenting and to empower dads to get involved in their kids' lives and get involved with the community. And so there's a number of ways that we do that. One, we host events, although we haven't really hosted events lately. Just for Dad Nights, we've hosted family events, various things like a Halloween party, for example. And then we try to inspire dads with the podcast, so the Rad Dad Show. We try to interview dads that inspire us in some way, and hopefully dads out there listening, get inspired. And just it's just about again making positive community connections and bringing people together, and just kind of putting out some good in the world, and hopefully that good kind of comes back to us.
I love it. Well, hey, listen, it's a real pleasure to have you here on the show. We want to, one of our mandates here that we're really serious about is shining a light on people and providing a platform for people that are change makers, that are, making real tangible impacts and challenging their fellow community members in the right direction. And you're doing it in a number of different ways. And plus the Governor General's Award. I mean, we had to get you on just for that, pal. So congratulations, keep it up, and I'll look forward to the next time our paths cross. Thanks for making time for us today.
Thanks, Ryan. It's a pleasure.
You got it. That's Kristian Basaraba. I love it. Just the project itself, and I know I'm reading some of the comments on YouTube. Those of you that are watching here live, and obviously he's an impressive guy.